The $545 million military scandal surrounding Pete Hegseth has become a defining moment in exposing the fragile layers of trust that bind military spending, government oversight, and the influence of powerful figures. At its core, the scandal revolves around an enormous sum of taxpayer money that was allocated for military programs, projects, and defense contracts, only to be mismanaged and redirected in ways that have raised serious questions about corruption and accountability. The sheer size of the scandal, involving nearly $500 million, highlights not only the risks of financial misuse but also the systemic flaws that allow such actions to occur with little transparency until someone finally steps forward to expose them. For years, the public has placed confidence in the belief that military funding is channeled toward national security and the welfare of service members, but this case demonstrates how easily financial priorities can be manipulated by individuals and institutions for personal or political gain. The role of Pete Hegseth in this controversy is not simply a matter of being linked to the funds but also of being a public figure who has long positioned himself as a voice for the military and a defender of conservative values. Hegseth's prominence on national media platforms gave him the ability to shape public opinion about military spending and patriotism, and it is precisely this influence that makes the scandal so explosive. When someone trusted as a champion for veterans and soldiers becomes associated with questionable financial dealings tied to military contracts, it undermines not only personal credibility but also broader confidence in the institutions they represent. The irony is powerful and unsettling, because it suggests that individuals who claim to protect military integrity may, in fact, be exploiting it for financial benefit. The $545 million at the heart of this scandal is not just a number, it represents the hard-earned money of taxpayers who believe they are contributing to the defense of the nation. Every dollar mismanaged is a dollar not going to the equipment, training, or healthcare that soldiers genuinely need. Misuse of funds on such a massive scale has real-world consequences, potentially leaving service members without the resources they require while enriching a small circle of insiders. This dynamic reveals a troubling disconnect between the stated goals of military budgets and the actual ways funds are allocated, opening the door for scrutiny not just of Hegseth's involvement but of the entire process by which contracts are awarded and funds are distributed. Central to the scandal is the issue of oversight, or rather the lack of it. Military budgets are often shrouded in layers of secrecy, justified by the need to protect national security, but this secrecy can also serve as a shield for questionable practices. Without transparent systems of accountability, massive contracts can be signed, funds can be shifted, and deals can be made in ways that escape the public eye until investigative journalists, whistleblowers, or determined officials bring them to light. In this case, the revelations expose just how easily loopholes in oversight mechanisms can be exploited, and how figures with influence in both political and media spheres can maneuver themselves into positions where scrutiny is minimal. The scandal forces a re-evaluation of how oversight should function, demanding reforms that prioritize accountability over secrecy when billions of taxpayer dollars are at stake. The involvement of Wesley in bringing this scandal to light marks a turning point in the narrative. Without his investigative push and willingness to challenge powerful figures, the mismanagement might have continued unchecked. Bell's role underscores the importance of independent voices and the courage required to confront entrenched systems of power. By exposing the scandal, he not only revealed the questionable dealings tied to Hegseth but also highlighted the fragility of public trust in how military funds are managed. The exposure of such a vast misuse of money inevitably sparks outrage, but it also empowers citizens to demand change, creating pressure for deeper investigations and stronger safeguards against future scandals. Another layer of this controversy lies in the relationship between politics, media, and the military. Hegseth's career exemplifies how these domains intersect, with his military background granting him credibility, his media role amplifying his influence, and his political leanings aligning him with specific agendas. This blending of roles creates an environment where influence can be leveraged in ways that benefit personal or political interests, blurring the line between genuine service and self-serving exploitation. The scandal thus becomes more than a case of financial mismanagement. It is a symbol of how deeply intertwined these spheres have become and how dangerous that entanglement can be when transparency and accountability are lacking. For many, the most alarming aspect of the $545 million scandal is not just the potential corruption but the sense of betrayal. When the public places trust in individuals who claim to defend national interests and protect those who serve, that trust is sacred. Breaking it through questionable dealings erodes confidence not only in the individuals involved but also in the broader institutions they represent. Once trust is broken at this level, it is incredibly difficult to rebuild, leaving citizens more skeptical, more disillusioned, and less willing to believe in the integrity of their leaders. The scandal therefore has long-lasting implications that extend far beyond the immediate details of contracts and funds, reshaping the way people view military spending and political accountability. As more information emerges, the scandal is forcing a national conversation about the integrity of those who handle military budgets, the transparency of the systems that govern contracts, and the role of media personalities in shaping perceptions of patriotism while potentially exploiting their platforms for financial gain. The case of Pete Hegseth is a stark reminder that influence and visibility do not guarantee integrity, and that even those who project an image of loyalty to military values can be implicated in actions that undermine them. The magnitude of $545 million ensures that this story will not be dismissed as a minor lapse or a bureaucratic error but as a profound breach of trust that demands accountability from everyone involved in the process, from contractors to politicians to media figures. Wesley Bell's explosive revelations have acted as a lightning rod in the unfolding $545 million military scandal, transforming what could have been an internal controversy into a national reckoning over accountability, power, and influence. Bell's investigative work and fearless exposure of the scandal gave the public a clearer picture of how deeply mismanagement and corruption had infiltrated areas of military spending. Without his determination, the irregularities might have remained buried under layers of bureaucracy and silence. His actions illustrate the critical importance of oversight and the necessity of individuals willing to challenge those in power, even when doing so invites backlash from influential figures and institutions. Bell's revelations not only implicated Pete Hegseth but also pulled back the curtain on the wider ecosystem of contractors, political allies, and decision-makers who enabled such massive sums to be misallocated or misused. The impact of these revelations cannot be overstated, because they transformed a story about financial mismanagement into a broader discussion about accountability in governance and media. By directly linking a high-profile figure like Hegseth to the scandal, Bell elevated the issue from a routine case of questionable contracts to a national scandal with political and cultural consequences. His findings forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths about how taxpayer money is handled, how oversight systems often fail, and how individuals in positions of influence can manipulate the system for their own benefit. More importantly, Bell showed how silence or complicity among powerful insiders can allow such practices to flourish unchecked, eroding trust in government and military leadership. The courage required for Bell to step into the spotlight should not be underestimated. Exposing such a scandal involves risks, from political retaliation to personal attacks. Hegseth's visibility as a media personality with strong ties to influential political figures meant that any attempt to expose him would likely trigger an aggressive defense. Yet Bell persisted, prioritizing truth and accountability over personal convenience. In doing so, he reminded the public that the fight for transparency often depends on individuals willing to resist pressure and speak up when others remain silent. His role echoes the actions of past whistleblowers and investigators who placed public interest above personal safety or political alignment, reinforcing the principle that democracy depends on watchdogs willing to shine a light where corruption lurks. Bell's revelations also highlight the complex web of relationships that often protects figures like Hegseth from scrutiny. Military contracts on the scale of hundreds of millions of dollars are rarely managed in isolation. They involve networks of companies, lobbyists, policymakers, and media narratives that shape public perception. By tracing the threads of the scandal, Bell demonstrated how these networks operate and how individuals with influence can exploit them for gain while avoiding consequences. This exposure not only damaged Hegseth's reputation but also raised uncomfortable questions about the broader ecosystem that allowed such misuse of funds to occur in the first place. It pointed to the systemic nature of corruption and the complicity of those who benefit from the system's flaws. The public reaction to Bell's findings has been marked by outrage, disbelief, and a renewed demand for accountability. Citizens expect their leaders to safeguard taxpayer dollars and ensure that military spending is directed toward genuine national security needs. To learn that $500 million was potentially mishandled shakes the very foundation of that expectation. Bell's role in breaking this information into the public sphere gave people a clear focal point for their frustration and anger, channeling attention not only toward Hegseth but also toward the broader structures of oversight. His revelations amplified the voices of citizens demanding reforms, investigations, and greater transparency in how military funds are managed. One of the most significant impacts of Bell's revelations is the way they exposed the blurred boundaries between politics, media, and the military. Hegseth's position as a television personality gave him a platform to influence public opinion on matters of patriotism, spending, and policy. At the same time, his military background lent him credibility that made his advocacy appear authentic and trustworthy. Bell's findings disrupted this carefully crafted image, showing how influence and credibility can be weaponized for personal or political gain. This disruption forces the public to reassess not only Hegseth's role but also the broader question of how media figures with military or political ties shape narratives in ways that may conceal deeper truths. Bell's exposure of the scandal also underscores the fragility of public trust. When citizens learn that leaders or personalities they believed in are implicated in financial misconduct, it breeds cynicism and disillusionment. People begin to question not only the individuals exposed but also the systems that enabled them. In this sense, Bell's revelations serve a dual purpose. They uncover wrongdoing while also serving as a wake-up call about the vulnerabilities in oversight and accountability mechanisms. The scandal thus becomes not only a story about individuals but also a case study in systemic weakness, pushing society to confront uncomfortable truths about the institutions meant to safeguard public funds. The timing of Bell's revelations adds another layer of significance. In an era where political polarization is high and trust in institutions is low, the exposure of a scandal of this magnitude reinforces existing doubts and divisions. Supporters of Hegseth may see the revelations as politically motivated attacks, while critics view them as overdue accountability. This polarization, while expected, does not diminish the factual weight of Bell's findings. Instead, it highlights how scandals involving large sums of money and prominent figures inevitably become cultural flashpoints, shaping debates not only about corruption but also about integrity, loyalty, and political identity. In practical terms, Bell's revelations are likely to fuel calls for reform in how military contracts are awarded and monitored. They expose the need for stronger auditing systems, clearer lines of accountability, and protections for those who dare to expose corruption. By documenting the failures that allowed $545 million to be mishandled, Bell has given lawmakers, watchdog groups, and citizens a clear case study to push for change. His findings may also embolden others within the system to come forward with their own information, creating a ripple effect that expands the scope of accountability beyond this single case. Bell's actions ultimately emphasize the power of truth in the face of entrenched systems of influence. By refusing to remain silent and by courageously bringing details of the scandal into the public eye, he shifted the narrative from quiet corruption to public accountability. His role illustrates that even in an era of skepticism and division, revelations grounded in facts and courage can still spark change, force conversations, and remind the nation that accountability remains the cornerstone of democracy. The broader consequences of the Pete Hegseth $545 million military scandal after Wesley Bell's revelation stretch far beyond the immediate financial mismanagement and the exposure of one public figure. This scandal forces society to confront the interconnected nature of politics, media, and the military, and how the entanglement of these spheres creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited at the expense of public trust. When a prominent media personality with military credentials becomes implicated in questionable financial dealings, the damage ripples outward, affecting not only his own reputation but also the credibility of the institutions with which he is associated. These consequences are not confined to the details of a single case but resonate across national debates about integrity, oversight, and accountability in the use of public funds. One of the most striking consequences is the erosion of confidence in military spending. The American public has long been told that massive military budgets are necessary to ensure national security, safeguard freedoms, and support the men and women in uniform. Yet when such an enormous sum of money, over $500 million, is linked to scandal and mismanagement, citizens begin to question whether these funds are truly being used for their intended purpose. This skepticism undermines the moral foundation on which military budgets are justified. Instead of feeling assured that their taxes are strengthening the nation, people begin to suspect that they may simply be feeding a system rife with waste, corruption, and self-interest. This suspicion has profound consequences for the relationship between citizens and their government, and it may reshape debates about how much money should be allocated to defense in the first place. The scandal also damages the credibility of media figures who present themselves as defenders of patriotism and military values. Pete Hegseth has long built his brand on his military service and his role as a strong, outspoken advocate for conservative principles. His media presence gave him a powerful platform to shape public opinion, often framing himself as someone who understands the sacrifices of soldiers and the importance of national defense. The revelation that he may have been linked to financial misconduct tied to military contracts undermines that carefully cultivated image. It forces audiences to reconsider whether the narratives presented by such figures are genuine expressions of loyalty or whether they serve as convenient covers for personal or financial agendas. This realization can diminish the influence of media personalities and lead to greater skepticism about those who use military credentials as a foundation for their authority. Another broad consequence lies in the political sphere. Scandals of this magnitude inevitably become political weapons, with opponents seizing on them to highlight corruption and hypocrisy, while allies scramble to defend or downplay the revelations. This dynamic further polarizes the political landscape, as each side interprets the scandal not purely as a matter of truth or accountability but as ammunition for broader ideological battles. The polarization makes it more difficult to achieve meaningful reforms, as debates over solutions become mired in partisan conflict. Nevertheless, the exposure forces politicians to respond, even if their responses are filtered through partisan agendas. The scandal therefore influences legislative priorities, public debates, and the broader political climate in which decisions about military spending are made. The consequences also extend into the realm of oversight and accountability mechanisms. The scandal demonstrates how existing systems designed to monitor military spending and contracts fail to prevent such massive mismanagement. This failure sparks urgent questions about the adequacy of current oversight bodies, the transparency of contracting processes, and the protections for whistleblowers and investigators who attempt to expose wrongdoing. In response, there may be increased pressure to strengthen auditing practices, enforce stricter accountability measures, and reduce the secrecy that often surrounds military budgets. Even if reforms are slow to materialize, the scandal becomes a touchstone for advocates of transparency, providing a concrete example of why change is necessary. The cultural consequences of the scandal are equally significant. In a society already grappling with declining trust in institutions, learning that a prominent figure tied to both the military and media has been implicated in a scandal of this size intensifies feelings of disillusionment. Citizens who once believed in the integrity of military spending may feel betrayed, while those already skeptical see the scandal as confirmation of their doubts. This erosion of trust does not stay confined to the military or media but spills into broader perceptions of government, politics, and leadership. Once trust is broken, it creates an environment where conspiracy theories thrive, where skepticism outweighs cooperation, and where cynicism becomes the default stance of many citizens. The scandal also carries implications for the military community itself. Service members and veterans who rely on public support, adequate funding, and a culture of respect may feel disheartened when they see funds misused or misdirected. It reinforces the sense that while ordinary soldiers sacrifice and endure hardships, those in positions of power benefit from systems that enrich themselves at the expense of those on the ground. This disconnect can harm morale, weaken the bond between the military and the society it serves, and complicate recruitment and retention efforts in the long run. The scandal, therefore, impacts not only civilian perceptions but also the internal dynamics of the armed forces. Another consequence lies in how the scandal reshapes the narrative about patriotism and loyalty. Figures like Hegseth have often framed themselves as defenders of traditional values, wrapping their arguments in the language of love for country and respect for the troops. By being implicated in a financial scandal tied to military contracts, that narrative becomes tarnished. It reveals how easily patriotic rhetoric can be weaponized to mask self-serving behavior. This revelation encourages a broader conversation about what patriotism really means and whether it should be measured by words and media presence or by tangible actions that genuinely support those who serve. The scandal's exposure by Wesley Bell also has the consequence of empowering other investigators, journalists, and whistleblowers. By successfully bringing the issue to light, Bell demonstrated that entrenched systems of influence can be challenged. This creates a ripple effect, encouraging others who may have information about similar misconduct to step forward. In this sense, the scandal not only reveals wrongdoing but also energizes a culture of accountability, inspiring future revelations and investigations that might otherwise have remained suppressed. On the global stage, the scandal may weaken America's image as a nation that upholds transparency and integrity in its governance. Allies and adversaries alike watch how the United States manages its defense spending and how it responds to corruption within its own ranks. A scandal of this magnitude provides fodder for critics who argue that American institutions are no less vulnerable to corruption than those it often criticizes abroad. This perception can erode moral authority in international relations and complicate efforts to project leadership based on principles of integrity and accountability. Finally, the scandal underscores the dangers of intertwining media influence, political agendas, and military spending. When these spheres overlap, they create opportunities for individuals to wield outsized influence without sufficient checks on their behavior. The broader consequence is a system that prioritizes narratives over accountability, appearances over substance, and personal gain over public service. Exposing this entanglement forces society to confront uncomfortable truths about how power operates and how easily it can be abused when oversight is weak and trust is taken for granted.